Uncanny X-Men number 190 is titled An Age Undreamed Of, and it is such an underrated classic. This issue is part 1 of Kulan Gath's New York takeover, and he's cast a spell around Manhattan Island, transforming it from the bustling modern-day society as we know it back to a more barbaric historical age. Everything and everyone within his magic green energy wall has been affected, from the buildings to the cars, and yes, right down to the heroes. The interesting part is that the people aren't exactly mind-wiped or mesmerized per se. They still hold the same values and virtues that they once did before the transformation, but now they are applying their behavior relative to this new reality that they're in, and as though they've always belonged to it. This is a strange issue, and it's a bit of a departure from the usual territory for the X franchise. It's heavier on the fantasy elements than usual, but it doesn't totally betray the brand by doing too much of a deep dive into, like, Conan the Barbarian style storytelling. I'm not really too big on super high fantasy concepts, so I'm happy that the story got reined in from what it was probably originally planned out to be, because what we ended up with here is a really fun detour into an alternate reality where heroes make deals with villains and everyone has the opportunity to be reimagined for a hot minute. Even though I think this issue might seem a bit intimidating to readers who have never seen it before, because it's kind of out there plot-wise and focuses on characters who wouldn't really be considered mainstream, it's really quite a delight to read, and I enjoyed every page of it. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's like an easy to digest issue, but it isn't that complicated either, and I think it's perfect for anybody who's looking for something different and magical from the X-Men. I have lots of great praise to give, so let's just get right into it. Here are my highlights from Uncanny X-Men number 190.
Kulan Gath.
Kulan Gath is the big bad of this issue. I don't know a whole lot about him, but he seems to be a very evil man. He's an ancient wizard who appeared first in old issues of Conan the Barbarian, and then later as an enemy of Spider-Man, but this is the first and I think only time that he's ever vexed the X-Men. Prior to Kulan Gath changing New York into the historical analog that it currently is, his essence was trapped in a necklace, which is actually something that he kind of willingly did himself a long time ago, back when he was fighting Conan as a ways of achieving relative immortality. But he can only ever free himself from the necklace by having someone else put it on and thus taking over their body with his form. As with most supervillains, his evil scheme here is all in service of taking over the world. In this mystical barbaric realm, Kulan's sorcery reigns supreme, and it seems as though he can pretty much accomplish anything he wants. But it's not just about being the supreme overlord of humanity, he also practices ritualistic sacrifices and traditions of this age, and Val Cooper confirms that he's exclusively been sacrificing children in the name of whatever evil cause it is that he serves. So yeah, he's definitely a bad guy. Val Cooper also talks about the progress that Kulan's transformation wall is making. She says it began in the heart of downtown Manhattan, and then it quickly spread to encompass the entire island. It's obvious that he's seeking for this energy wall to eventually cover the world, but it seems he wants to conquer all of New York first, and in my opinion, it's no wonder why. Since New York is often the epicenter of all superhuman activity in the Marvel Universe, it makes sense that he'd want to eliminate all of his potential threats before moving on to bigger and bolder things. Kulan is very susceptible to magic, him being a magic-based entity himself, so of course the biggest threat to him here would be Doctor Strange. He was super smart with his attack strategy, and he took out the good doctor whilst Doctor Strange was unaware of his presence. It looks like he has him trapped in what I'm assuming is the very blue gem necklace that he was wearing himself, but I don't know for sure yet. Doctor Strange isn't the only threat to Kulan Gath's takeover here, though. There are other mystical beings in New York, like Illyana and Selene and the Scarlet Witch, most of whom we see in this issue, and I'll talk a little bit about them later. In the vernacular of Kulan's world, anything that is superpowered is basically being referred to as magic or sorcery, even though mutant powers aren't necessarily casting spells per se. He sees anyone with a superpower as a threat, but also as a potential asset, and so one of his goals here in conquering New York is to build his Hell Horde totally out of brainwashed heroes. He's already convinced the Morlocks to serve him, and they pretty much act as his grunts and lackeys throughout this issue as they do his dirty deeds, and I'm pretty sure that they probably didn't need much convincing to do them in the first place. But the Morlocks aren't nearly enough for world domination, and so he wants every super being he can muster to be on his side, but if he can't convince or control them to serve him, then the alternative is that he will want them all dead. It's easy pickings for him to sway the New Mutants onto his side. They're young and inexperienced in resisting magics, and since his magical energy seems to work best on the dark arts and by preying on negative emotions, like the fear and distrust and insecurity that the New Mutants feel from everyday society, he's very quickly able to sway them over to lead his Hell Horde. One of the bigger challenges in this side-switching brigade he's on, though, comes in the form of Charles Xavier. Like he did to Doctor Strange, he had to strike out at Xavier whilst Xavier was unaware of his presence. Otherwise, Charles could have counteracted Kulan with his mental powers, which far surpass Kulan's own mental abilities. But again, Kulan struck first, and so Charles is basically as good as done. But Kulan doesn't only want to enslave Xavier, he's also merged him with Caliban so that he can use both their powers in conjunction with one another. Caliban uses his mutant power to detect mutants, and Xavier uses his telepathy to summon them or sway them over to Kulan's side. Of the two merged mutants, Xavier's will dominates Caliban's in resisting Kulan's influence by far. Charles is actively fighting against Kulan's mesmerism, whereas Caliban pretty much just gives in. Since they are now one entity, it's like Caliban's putty brain weakens Xavier's and makes it easier for Kulan to push the right buttons. Even though Xavier is resisting this with all of his might, it's a losing battle and he can only put up a fight for so long. Kulan Gath establishes himself as a monumental threat to the X-Men's lives in this one issue alone, and though not all of them seem to be totally aware of who he is or what he's capable of yet, it's clear that he's not someone to be taken lightly, and I look forward to seeing him really throw down with the mutants in the next issue. Even though high fantasy isn't really my scene, I do love wizardry in general and magic and stuff, so Kulan Gath is a very welcome source of antagonism.
Storm and Callisto.
By the time this issue rolled around, it had been well established that Storm and Callisto are the bitterest of rivals. Storm usurped Callisto in combat for the right to lead the Morlocks, and Callisto has held that against her ever since, even going so far as to destroy her teammates' lives just to get back at her, like when she tried to marry off Kitty Pryde to Caliban. Not many things can faze Storm, but Callisto has a way of getting under her skin and making her break her usual regal, calm, cool composure. She makes Storm forget that all life is precious, and Storm often feels a strong desire to kill Callisto. And so what makes this issue so interesting is that now, instead of being at each other's throats, Storm and Callisto actually have to team up and help one another if they ever hope to save New York and free their friends from Kulan Gath's spell. It doesn't start off that way with them, though. In the beginning, they are just as susceptible to Kulan's magic as everybody else is, and they both believe they're a regular part of this ancient world that they now reside in. Callisto names herself as a warrior, and indeed she's a henchwoman of Kulan Gath there, whereas I think Storm might be some kind of royalty in this reality, because Callisto refers to her as a goddess. That's nothing new, since people have been calling Storm a goddess forever, but she's dressed really elegantly, and the room that she wakes up in is super lavish and exquisitely decorated in very altar-like manner, so it really does lend itself to some sort of divine feeling. I think that the spell that Kulan cast makes these people express versions of themselves that they either believe themselves to be, or just cast them in a familiar role that they'll know how to play. In any case, it's great watching the contrast between both Callisto and Storm in this new world, because they are both such different people to begin with. I love the beginning when they are fighting each other, and it's so cool to see how differently each one of them views themselves based on their new roles here, and yet even with those differences, we see how they are both still quite an even match for one another. Storm was on a cruise ship on her way to Africa at the time that Kulan Gath's spell hit, hence why this whole scene takes place on like a Viking-looking ship. And when Storm wakes up, she knows that things are right, but that things are also wrong at the same time. I think that plays into Storm's intuitiveness. Even though her connection to the Earth has been severed thanks to Forge's power neutralizer, she's still got instincts, and her mind has been attuned by years of fundamental communication with nature and weather patterns. Even though she can't actively commune with the elements anymore, it makes sense to me that something in her gut would still be ringing and telling her that something is amiss here. She doesn't have long to think about it though, because Callisto and her merry band of Morlocks break down her door and demand that she comes with them to become Kulan Gath's slave. Obviously Storm's not going to do that, and so she puts up a fuss and manages to escape. This again shows that even if Storm doesn't have her powers, she's not a slouch in the slightest. She's resourceful, and she knows that she doesn't need powers to survive, even though I think in this reality, Storm doesn't even know that she once had powers, which she now lost. Storm and Callisto's fight atop the ship's narrow mast is one of my most favorite scenes in this issue. It just seems so Peter Pan-y to me, and I love how imperiled they both are. There are literally flames consuming the entire wooden ship, but Callisto doesn't give a damn. She's after Storm's blood, and she isn't going to rest until she gets it. Something deep inside this transformed Callisto knows that she hates Storm with a passion. She might not know explicitly why, but as Val mentioned in the beginning of this issue, friends are still friends and enemies are still enemies, so Callisto isn't kidding around when it comes to taking down Storm, even if it means putting her own life in danger in the process. Callisto's knife does manage to cut Storm, and then that shock seems to pull Storm out of Kulan Gath's funk and remind her of who she is. But we don't really get to explore that moment any deeper, because the next thing we know, both of them are in the water and floating away outside of Kulan's magic barrier. I'm curious to see if the next issue will play on Storm's little stab wound further though, like if blood is the key to breaking Kulan's spell. It certainly was the key to breaking him out of his necklace prison in last issue when the ruffian killed the fisherman who first found it, so maybe blood will be an important detail to remember here too. Storm and Callisto's relationship gets even more interesting after they are outside of the magical wall and have regained their regular senses. Even though that passion and hatred that they felt for each other whilst fighting under the spell was very real and is still true even without the magic, they know that there is greater evil at work here, and they are sensible enough to put aside their interpersonal differences and work together to figure out how to stop it. I like how them working together is already like making a deal with a devil, but then an even worse devil in Selene cracks a deal with them too, so now it's like Storm will have to doubly watch her own back. At least with Callisto, Storm kind of already knows the bed she's making, but with Selene, it's a total wildcard situation. Storm has already proven that she can beat and somewhat control Callisto, so there's solace in knowing that if she can't explicitly trust Callisto, then at least she knows how to forcibly stop her from totally betraying her. But when it comes to Selene, well, who knows? And actually, it's not very fair of me to frame Callisto in that shady light. Even though she does hate Storm, and would no doubt feed her to the dogs if she had a chance, Callisto would never betray the Morlock code. And since Storm is, by right, the current Morlock leader, Callisto would never actually take her down through any sort of explicit betrayal. She wants to re-earn her title as leader the right and correct way, and that means humiliating Storm publicly so the other Morlocks will look at Callisto favorably again. Storm and Callisto actually share a bit of like a tender moment on their way back into the Magic Manhattan. Callisto calls Storm out for showboating when she tries to lockpick their way out of the government detention center where they're being held, and she wonders why Storm doesn't just blast the door open with a lightning bolt. That's when Storm confides in Callisto that her powers have been stripped and that she's basically only human now. It was extremely risky for Storm to tell that to Callisto, since she's essentially exposing a great weakness and vulnerability in herself to someone who really wants Storm dead. But the fact that Storm doesn't even really hesitate in telling Callisto this truth shows that either A, she doesn't see Callisto as much of a threat to begin with, or B, that she does somewhat respect Callisto enough to let her know that they are on like an equal playing field of sorts, and that they can't rely on any sort of quickie weather manipulation to get them around here. Storm isn't helpless though, and I'm not trying to paint her as though she's like an easy target without her powers, but it does give Callisto a bit of an edge here to even their score if she wanted to. Instead though, Callisto actually feels like sorrow or sympathy for Storm, and even feels disappointed for her. Callisto definitely still wants to earn back her title as leader of the Morlocks, but for it to mean anything, she has to beat Storm when Storm's on the same level that she was when she first beat her. It's like Callisto views Storm being powerless as like a handicap, and there's no pride in beating someone who is lesser now than they were before. I actually thought it was very telling of Callisto's sense of honor to not take advantage of Storm's situation. Even though Callisto has always been painted as cunning and conniving, here she shows that she's also respectful and like somewhat considerate. I don't think she's purposely doing Storm any favors by not striking her down, but she also knows that as a Morlock, Callisto is bound by duty to take care of their own, and since Storm is the Morlock leader, she's got to do her best to keep Storm safe. Overall, the dynamic between these two in this issue was definitely my favorite thing, and I wish that we would someday get a mini-series where it's just Storm and Callisto taking on the world.
Selene.
Selene continues to do what she does best in this issue, and that is manipulating things at a very high level. As it turns out, she and Kulan Gath go way back, and they've been at each other's throats for, like, who knows how long. I get the sense that Kulan doesn't know that Selene is currently a resident of New York, as she has somehow evaded his enchantment, just like how Spider-Man did, but Kulan doesn't seem to notice. I think it's a testament to her power and abilities that she can traipse around New York without being spotted by the all-seeing sorcerer, and in fact hide in the shadows of his very own palace without him or the Xavier Caliban creature noticing her. I like that Selene doesn't just barge in, spells a cast in after she discovers what's going on. Even though she considers Kulan to be like an oaf of a wizard, she realizes that she's the one at the disadvantage here, and she's smart enough to know that she needs to amass a small army of her own in order to really overthrow him. You don't get to be a millennia-old sorceress by jumping into battles ego first, and so Selene whisks away to start recruiting, and her first stop is for the two mutants who just tried to kill her in the last issue, Magma and Rachel. Rach and Mags are totally under Kulan's spell, so they have no recollection of themselves nor of their relationship with Selene, so they are primed for the picking when it comes to Selene's master plan. Selene isn't the type to waste her time engaging in pointless battles with people. Anything she's going to do, it's going to be in the service of some sort of greater purpose. So even when she saves Rachel and Magma here from the Morlocks, she's not really doing it as like a heroic act. She's got a master plan, and it's all about how Rachel and Magma fit into that plan that even inspires her to rescue them in the first place. But save them she does, and then she uses Rachel's telepathy to reach out to Storm and Callisto, who are beyond the magic Kulan Gath wall, and she strikes her devil's pact with them. She convinces Storm that she and Callisto need to come back inside to help her stop Kulan, or else the rest of the world will soon be in his thrall. They point out the obvious flaw with that plan in that if they go back to Manhattan, they'll just become part of the spell again and forget everything that they plan to do. But luckily for them, Selene is not unprepared. She says that she can cast her own spell over them so that they will be shielded from his influence once they re-enter. It won't make them aware that they are part of a fake world or anything, and they'll still forget everything about their modern selves and feel like they belong to this historic state, but at the very least, they'll remember the essence of what they are meant to be doing there, and it should provide their heroic urges with enough ammunition to seek out and destroy Kulan Gath. She also sneaks in that Storm and Callisto will forever consider Selene their ally and friend, which I think sheds some light on Selene's overall plan here. Yes, she wants Kulan Gath to be defeated, and she's willing to work with the heroes to see that it's done, but after one Supreme Overlord fails, usually there needs to be another one ready to take its place, and I have a sneaking suspicion that Selene plans to claim her spot and rule the roost probably immediately after Kulan falls. The more she can get these heroes on her side, the better off she'll be in the end, especially if there's like a little nudge of sorcery in all of them to implicitly trust and perhaps even obey her. Selene's final recruiting event happens after the New Mutants and the Avengers have their bar brawl. She helps them to stop the battle by animating the floor to grab the Morlocks who are attacking Illyana, and then after the New Mutants take off with Spider-Man, she greets the Avengers with her big pitch. Rachel and Magma are with her, and she introduces them as her daughters, which is really loaded, and she basically tells it as it is. Kulan Gath needs to be stopped, and she's just the one to help lead them into battle against him. Unfortunately, it appears as though word got around about Selene's little networking tour, though, because Kulan Gath interrupts her and teleports her away from the heroes before she can give them any further help or instructions. I'd actually say that Selene did a pretty good job of getting around and spreading the word, all things considered. She's literally like one of two people in New York right now who's not under some sort of wayward spell, so to have gone under Kulan's radar long enough to have reached out to 3 different sets of heroes really ain't too shabby. She doesn't let her capture faze her. She's probably expected it all this time anyway, and I like how she mocks Kulan after he loses track of the heroes' location. Anytime you're being held in captivity, it's always a great idea to ridicule your captor's power levels and intelligence, just in case you need them to prove to you once again just how powerful they really are. I'm joking, that's never a good idea to do. In the end, the heroes all discuss Selene's plans, and even though none of them outright trust her, they know that what she said was true and that Kulan Gath must be destroyed. What's interesting here is that it does seem as though Selene's own plan of injecting her will above Kulan's will seems to be working, as neither Magma nor Rachel seem able to have like an independent thought that isn't somehow wrapped around serving Selene. It feels like some sweet revenge for Selene on these two, given the embarrassment they both gave her in the previous issue, but it also feels like a preview in the grander scheme of what Selene has in store for all the heroes. I really love the Selene layer in this story, and I think it adds some greater complexity to the plot. It's heroes having to cut deals with villains, while villains seek to overthrow other villains, and to me, that is much more interesting and entertaining than just a straight-up hero versus villain linear story.
New Mutants.
The New Mutants are captured by Kulan Gath in this issue, and they are brainwashed into doing his evil bidding and leading his hell horde. He does this by taking the negative emotions they all feel and combining their darkness with his own power to reshape their bodies and souls. I think that's just a nasty way of saying that he pulls out their dark sides. I actually really liked seeing the New Mutants unleashed here. Anytime we get to see the characters go haywire with their powers is really exciting to me. It usually only happens when they're acting villainous though, because then they don't give a hoot about the ramifications of their wild and crazy ways when they're in that state. So watching Wolvesbane in her most primal wolfy state and seeing Sunspot shatter the earth with his grand slam were really great moments for me. I like seeing the New Mutants take a leading role, even if it is on the side of evil, and it just goes to show their potential as X-Men is already growing within them. Warlock is the most interesting member of the team here for me. When everyone is transformed by the spell, he disguises himself as like a regular looking human to better fit in, but his mind is also unchanged, just like how Selene's and Spider-Man's is. Kulan Gath has no idea who Warlock is, and when he captures them, he sees Warlock in his disguise, so he's none the wiser as to Warlock's true alien nature. Warlock is deep undercover and gathering information as he watches Kulan start to transform his friends into their darker selves, and it gets to a point where he can't take it anymore and he finally breaks free of the chains and tries to rescue them himself. He's too late though, and Kulan's spell has already taken effect. All of the New Mutants are now under his evil influence, and Warlock has no choice but to abandon them and flee. I love watching Warlock do this. He is such a coward of a character, and he knows it, and that's his almighty shame. Him running away is actually just like a strategic retreat, but to Warlock, he's running away in shame, and that is something that Warlock feels he's pretty much done all his life. So even though I think he knows that it's the right move to make right now, he's also just really ashamed of himself. Kulan tries to hunt him down afterwards, but because of Warlock's alien makeup, the Xavier/Caliban creature can't track him, so Warlock successfully gets away. He doesn't meet up with any of the other heroes though, so I'm very curious to see where Warlock has gotten off to and what kind of impact he'll have in the upcoming battle next issue, if he'll have any impact at all.
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man is the only hero who was purposely left unaffected by Kulan Gath's spell. The last time Kulan was freed from his necklace, Spider-Man was the hero to throw him back into it again, and then threw the necklace itself into the Hudson River where he thought no one would ever find it. Kulan leaving Spider-Man unaffected by the spell feels like it's a form of revenge for Kulan. He wants to hunt Spider-Man down and not only kill him or enslave him or whatever he plans to do with him, but he also wants Spider-Man to suffer emotionally by seeing what has become of not only the city that he lives in, but also of all his loved ones and friends and family. It feels like an awful lot to go through for just revenge, so I mean at least Kulan has world domination set on his radar too, and this isn't all just a grand scheme to get back at the Spider, because that would really just be overkill. One of my favorite tiny details in this issue is how all of Spider-Man's dialogue is printed with those little translation brackets that comics use when characters are speaking in different languages. I was confused for a moment when I saw them because literally everything up till Spider-Man scenes were all written in English, but then it dawned on me. The world that Kulan transformed New York into is so old that it predates the English language, and everything we've been reading up to this point hasn't actually been English at all, but some sort of like barbaric equivalent, and the writers have just been laying off the translation brackets for simplicity. This is the level of detail that I really appreciate in comics, and even though it's like so small that it really has like no impact or significance whatsoever in the plot itself, I think that it really helped to sell the world to me, and I feel more invested in Spider-Man's plight here, him being the only guy who can actually speak English. He puts up a really good fight against the possessed New Mutants, and he recognizes them as good guys, so he knows that something fishy is going on. Then, after he's captured and he hears the name Kulan Gath, it's pretty much confirmed to him that the wizard is back for revenge. Spider-Man honestly didn't do a whole lot this issue though, but it was still interesting to see the depths of Kulan's ego reflected in him. Him leaving Spider-Man unaffected by the spell was purely like a pride-driven thing. He wants the Spider to suffer at his hands like he himself suffered at Spider-Man's hands. Leaving him unaffected makes Kulan's entire master plan somewhat vulnerable, so it's really quite a ballsy move for the old wizard to do.
Illyana.
Illyana is one of the few characters who Kulan Gath purposely sends his army out to apprehend. She's a magic user, and so she's an imminent threat to his lofty goal of world domination. Illyana is transformed into a scullery maid in this reimagined world, and she's working at the pub where Spider-Man and the New Mutants have their big brawl. I'll admit, I was a little bit confused about Illyana's memories in this issue. I couldn't tell how much she recalled about her own powers in her own life and how much had been forgotten for her. When I first see her crouching in the corner, it feels like she's hiding and like she doesn't know what's going on or how to respond to what's going on, and it's very unlike the Illyana that we know. Then, as the Avengers and the X-Men join in battle, and Colossus and Sunder smash their ways in as well, it's like the memory of who she is suddenly returns to her. Her soul sword appears and she slashes Colossus with it, which in turn frees him of Kulan Gath's control. It doesn't cast him out of the spell entirely though, and he's not like the modern day version of himself, like in the way that Storm and Callisto were after they left the magic wall, but at least he's not acting evil and he's resumed his heroic attitudes. It just all rings weirdly to me though, because as the soul sword is described, it's supposed to disrupt magic, so by using it against Colossus, wouldn't it disrupt all of the magic and return him to his modern day self? I guess the magic wall is probably casting constantly, so even if it did disrupt the spell for a second, then the next second he would just fall back under it anyway, so maybe it did do its job and the rest was just magic taking its magical course. But I'm not convinced that Illyana even knowingly conjured up her soul sword here. The expression on her face makes it seem as though she's just as surprised to see it as anybody else is. Was it like an intrinsic part of her that just knew what to do? Or is the soul sword acting independently of Illyana and summoning itself? According to the narration, Illyana's memory of her mutant powers has been totally wiped clean, so if she forgets about her mutant powers, then who's to say that she doesn't forget about her sorceress abilities as well? That would make sense to me as an explanation as to why she was crouching in the corner hiding during the fight. She can't fight if she doesn't remember that she's a warrior in the first place. But then later, when she's talking to Captain America and he curses Selene for being both a mutant and a sorceress, she chimes in and says that she is both of those things too. So, does she remember that she's a mutant? I don't know, it's confusing, and I think the writing is a little bit contradictory here, but in any case, if she does remember that she's a sorceress, then I fully expect her to use those powers in the next issue to exploit Kulan Gath's weakness against sorcery and to help save the day in a truly magical way.
Avengers and X-Men.
The Avengers and the X-Men aren't exactly the heroes they used to be in this issue. Even though everyone supposedly holds the same instincts and virtues in this reality as they did in the regular reality, it takes a bit of convincing before they jump into action. They are all drinking at the pub when Spider-Man and the New Mutants barge in, and even though it's pretty obvious that he could use some help, Wasp and Star Fox just kind of like glance over and shrug it off. I guess brawls like this could probably have been considered normal in these Viking times. Maybe a night out wasn't complete until you saw a few shares of them. The Avengers don't spring into action until the New Mutants set their sights on Illyana, because I guess picking on the scullery maid is just one step too far. Captain America intervenes and gets in their way, and then Nightcrawler and Rogue join in on the defense too, and the fight really begins. I just think it was kind of rude of the Avengers and of the X-Men to wait until Spider-Man was felled before they even got up. Like, hello, if I was getting my ass kicked and was severely outnumbered, it would be great if y'all could just lend me a hand or something. Anyway, the Avengers and the X-Men join forces against Kulan Gath's Hell Horde, and they hold their own until Selene fells most of the bad guys herself, and then when Selene gets kidnapped, Callisto leads everyone to the top secret Morlocks sewer that only she knows about and where no one will be able to find them. She says that the tunnels are warded against Xavier/Caliban's power too, and that they'll be as safe here as anywhere could be considered safe when a wizard's concerned. Storm does a great job of helping to keep the troops focused in the end goal, even though everyone is a bit disheartened that Selene got captured and that Kulan Gath's power looks incredible. Captain America gives one of his cheesy, morale-boosting speeches, and suddenly everyone is roused and ready to go, except for Magma and Rachel, who still don't really know where their loyalties lie, whether it be with the heroes or with Selene. Overall, I was happy that this issue didn't detract from its momentum by catching up with all of the members of the Avengers and the X-Men as they adjusted to the new normal. It was a way stronger issue by focusing on just Storm and Callisto as the main characters and letting those two really drive the story forward. The last thing I want in an X-Men book is a trip down Avengers Avenue, so I'm very happy that that team stayed in their lane.
Panels.
Here are some mini moments that I found cute and funny from this issue.
5.
Callisto accusing Storm of showing off. I love that she thinks Storm cares so much about her as to even bother to try to impress Callisto. Baby, Storm doesn't give a shit what you think about her, and she already took your job, so she doesn't need to gloat about anything else.
4.
Rogue looking like a watermelon. Everyone scored some new threads in this issue, and while everyone looks cool in their own way, Rogue ended up looking green in the face. Is this some kind of new armor that she's sporting, or has Kulan Gath's spell just given her a new complexion too?
3.
Selene introducing Magma and Rachel as her children. Ugh, finally Selene's true intentions with Magma and Rachel are revealed. She wasn't trying to kill them all these issues, she was just trying to show them a mother's love, and in this case, a mother's love is most definitely tough love.
2.
Kulan Gath swallowing Selene whole. This sure is one way to make that goddess stop talking smack about you. If the heroes think she's got a big mouth, just wait until they see Kulan's.
1.
My favorite panel overall in this issue is Kulan Gath summoning forth Xavier/Caliban because it just looks like such a creep show. The conjoined entity looks so grim and pathetic here, and the way he's hunched over and completely subservient is just ugh. The misshapenness of his body boggles my mind a bit to look at, with all those folds in his skin and its like disproportionate legs and arms, and how like the Caliban head is being birthed out of the Xavier stomach. If looks could kill, this creature would already be a wanted felon for sure, and we would most certainly already all be dead. Believe it or not, there was only one noise lettering in this whole entire saga of an issue, and it's the Cthulhu when Colossus and Sunder break down the pub's wall and charge into battle. I don't think that there's anything particularly special or interesting about this Cthulhu, and in fact, I actually think it could have sounded more like a K-smash instead, but it's all we have to work with today, so here it is.
Fashion.
This issue had some very unique costuming for the heroes because it's set in such a different alternate reality than what we're used to seeing them in. I liked a lot of the new threads, but I think Storm's were my favorite. I feel like we never really get to see her in copper orange color because when does copper orange ever look good on anyone? But her metallic accessories here really sell it for her. She's totally got like an Amazon barbarian vibe going on, and it's like she could kick some ass and then hit up a photo shoot right afterwards. Callisto's outfit is so crazy that I have to highlight it too. I love this panel of her climbing the ship's ropes with that dagger in her mouth while wearing like nothing at all, with those cold looking metals clasped around her body. Her helmet is my favorite part, and it looks like it's just been forged with some leftover material, and like it wanted to be more imposing than it actually ended up being. My favorite in Guy's fashion here is Xavier's. We only see him in this getup for one panel, and for the rest he's that weird Xavier Caliban mishmash of an entity. He's wearing like some sort of magician-y yellow and red robe, and it looks like it has some sort of, I don't know, Asian influence in the design for some reason. He's not a mage, so I don't think him wearing this outfit makes explicit sense character-wise, but I think that mutants and their powers are deemed to be seen as sorceress in Kulan Gath's reality, so I think that's why Xavier is dressing the part. My favorite part is the baggy sleeves, and it looks like he could hide all kinds of mutant tricks up there.
Ads.
This issue, I'm highlighting the hacky sack like an expert ad. I don't know if hacky sacking is still a thing, but when I was in high school, hacky sacking was most definitely a thing. People would do it in like the yard or in the parking lot or underneath the stairwells. I feel like there's like a subsect of 90s teen movies and TV shows that uses hacky sack culture as a trope when dividing the students of a high school into schemas. But from my experience, it very much did exist and was a true thing, and the sack was primarily hacked by scene kids. This ad promises that it will make you an expert at the hack sack. How? Well, you'll have to send $2 to find out. No information is given here beyond the call to action of their promise, but sometimes a little minimalism advertising is all it takes to convince people. This ad couldn't even be bothered to fill up the entirety of the little blue box that it's using. The text is weirdly tiny and centered, where all of the other classified style boxes around it have like big bold letters and pictures and other marketing techniques that are really bold and eye-catching. I really don't know how hacky sack experts here could hope to compete with the sensory overload of this page, but maybe the true hacky sack enthusiast isn't fazed by the glitz and glam of the other ads, and they know just where to look to find what they're looking for. As I like to do when I see a physical address in any of these ads, I decided to Google Maps it to see what is currently there now, and it looks like it's just a postal office, which is probably exactly what it was when this issue was first published. That's a little anticlimactic and unfortunate for me, and I was hoping it might have been some sort of like hippie commune or some other stereotypical hacky sack place. Instead, it's just a big government building, and perhaps this P.O. box might still honor its hacky sack promise, just so long as you take inflation into consideration with that $2 fee. Well, that's it for this issue. Thanks so much for tuning in. Feel free to bum around for more of these reviews, or check out any of my other social media accounts for all kinds of fun X content. Videos, blog posts, panel scans, and more can also be found at my website, greatxmentations.com. Thanks again for stopping by today, and be sure to come back soon for more Great X-Mentations!